Hello, my name is Jesus Madero, and welcome to my final project for Statistical Inference. In this presentation, I will be discussing two academic papers that apply hypothesis testing in real world settings. The first is in the context of intelligent quality control for manufacturing spare parts, and the second involves the use of machine learning for stock loss forecasting in finance. Both papers offer unique insights into how hypothesis testing isn't just an academic exercise, but a vital tool for making accurate, cost-effective, and reliable decisions. I'll break down the methods, the hypotheses involved, and the findings, and I'll also explain how these approaches can be generalized to solve broader problems in the industry. Here's the structure of the presentation. First, I'll start with a refresher on what hypothesis testing is, including its components and tools. Then we'll explore each paper in depth, starting with the manufacturing application and then moving to the finance case. Along the way, I'll explain the techniques they use, such as dual-stage sampling and statistical model selection, and the metrics they rely on to assess performance. After that, I'll compare both studies side by side and reflect on what they teach us about applying statistics in practice. Hypothesis testing is one of the core ideas in statistics. It allows us to take sample data and make a decision about a larger population. At the heart of hypothesis testing are two statements: the null hypothesis, which assumes there's no effect or no difference, and the alternative hypothesis, which claims there is a statistically significant effect or relationship. The process helps us determine which of these two is more likely to be true. Based on our data, we use tools like p-values to measure the strength of evidence, z-scores or t-scores to assess how extreme our results are, and confidence intervals to define plausible ranges for population parameters. Without hypothesis testing, we'd have no way to quantify uncertainty or assess risk in our decisions. So, why is this so important in real life? Because businesses and organizations are constantly making decisions under uncertainty. Should we launch a new product line? Is a certain supplier meeting quality standards? Is this forecasting model reliable? Hypothesis testing lets us make those decisions based on our evidence, not assumptions. In the medical world, it tells us whether a treatment is working. In manufacturing, it helps us detect defects early. And in finance, it tells us whether a model is really better than just flipping a coin. It's a way to bring structure, objectivity, and accountability into our conclusions. In large-scale productions, even a small percentage of defects can lead to serious financial consequences. For example, in a factory producing 100,000 units, a 2% defect rate means 2,000 faulty items, each of which could cause delays, returns, or even safety issues. Traditional quality controls involves either inspecting every item or using fixed rules that aren't always efficient. But with Industry 4.0 and smart manufacturing, there's a growing demand for flexible systems that are both fast and reliable. That's where the first paper comes in. It presents a dual-stage hypothesis testing model that allows companies to make statistically sound decisions while reducing unnecessary testing. This paper is written by researchers from Dalian Polytechnic University, was presented at the 2024 IEEE AIIIM Symposium. Their goal was to improve how spare parts are inspected on production lines. The approach is designed to balance reliability and speed. Instead of inspecting all items, the system takes a sample, applies clear thresholds, and then uses statistics to determine whether to accept, reject, or investigate further. It's a structured approach that turns inspection into a decision tree, driven by data. This is a big step forward from traditional quality control methods that can be either too slow or too uncertain. Let's break down how this system works. It begins with a first stage sample of 52 items. If more than 15% of them are defective, the entire batch is rejected. If fewer than 5% are defective, the batch is accepted. These are clear cutoffs, but if the defect rate falls between 5% and 15%, the system recognizes that more data is needed. That's when a second stage sample of 141 additional items is collected. The results of both stages are combined, giving a total sample size of 193, and a final decision is made using a C-test. This process allows fast decisions when the result is obvious, but takes extra time when the result is uncertain. It's an efficient balance. The power of this model lies in its flexibility and efficiency. Many quality control systems either inspect too much, wasting time and resources, or too little, risking bad decisions. But this approach adjusts based on the situation. When the evidence is clear, it acts quickly. When it's not, it collects more data. That's exactly what hypothesis testing is supposed to do. Help us decide how much evidence we need before taking action. By defining cutoffs and structuring the sampling in stages, the authors show how we can reduce costs without sacrificing statistical confidence. This model was applied to various manufacturing contexts: spare parts screening, product assembly, and handling returned items. In each case, the dual-stage approach reduced unnecessary inspections and helped maintain consistency in product quality. In large production facilities, even small improvements like these translate into significant savings. Additionally, it gives managers a defensible, data-driven way to justify decisions, especially when dealing with suppliers or clients who demand transparency. Let's shift gears now to the second paper, which comes from the 2024 IEEE IC3I conference. This paper explores how hypothesis testing can support model selection in machine learning. The authors analyze whether different companies and geographic regions influence each other's stock losses. They do this by applying a variety of machine learning models and then comparing their accuracy using statistical metrics. It's a finance problem at its core, but the approach is grounded in a statistical inference, specifically evaluating whether patterns we see in the data are real or just noise. Financial markets are chaotic and unpredictable. Prices change consistently due to global events, market sentiment, or internal company dynamics. Traditional forecasting models often fail because they assume linearity or normality. Machine learning can help because it can model complex nonlinear relationships, but here's the challenge. With so many machine learning models to choose from, how do we know which one is trustworthy? This paper addresses that by using a statistical evaluation, not just accuracy but multiple error metrics and hypothesis tests, to determine if a model truly captures a meaningful pattern. In this study, the null hypothesis is that there's no meaningful influence between companies or regions in terms of their stock loss patterns. The alternative hypothesis states that these firms and their locations do influence each other. The dataset is quite robust: 8,771 records across six major firms, covering regions like North America, Europe, and Asia. Key features include opening and closing prices, trade volume, adjusted close, and firm location. What makes this interesting is that it's not just about making predictions, it's about testing whether patterns of influence exist between companies and regions using a statistical validation. To assess this hypothesis, the researchers tested seven different machine learning models. These included linear regression, lasso regression, and bridge regression, models that handle multicollinearity differently. Then they included SVM, decision trees, and ensemble methods like random forest and XGBoost, which are more complex and can capture nonlinear relationships. This variety allowed them to explore different levels of complexity and regularization. The goal wasn't just to find the most accurate model, but to determine through comparison which model statistically supports the hypothesis that firms and regions affect one another's outcomes. To compare model performance, the researchers didn't rely on single metric. They used five different ones: R-square score, which measures how much variation in the data the model explains; mean square error (MSE), which penalizes large errors; mean gamma deviance (MGD), which is great for skewed distributions like financial data; Hubert loss, which balances sensitivity and robustness; and Thiel's U statistic, which compares a model's performance to a basic benchmark. These metrics capture different strengths and weaknesses. For example, a model with a good R square might still have high MSE is if it performs poorly on certain days. That's why the multiple metrics are essential for a balanced evaluation. Let's take a closer look at what each of these metrics means in plain terms. R squared tells us how well the model fits the actual data. Values closer to 1 indicate a good fit. MSE is more sensitive to large mistakes. It punishes big deviations between predicted and actual values. MGD helps when data isn't symmetrically distributed, which is common in finance due to rare but extreme losses. Huber loss is robust to outliers. It doesn't let one extreme value skew the results too much. And Thiel's U gives a relative benchmark. It tells us whether the model is better than just using a naive forecast, like assuming tomorrow's price will be the same as today's. These interpretations help decision makers trust not just the prediction, but the reasoning behind choosing a model. After running all the models and comparing them with these metrics, the results were clear. The best performing model was linear regression, had the highest R square indicating strong explanatory power, and the lowest mean gamma deviance at just 0.000045, an extremely low error rate. This suggests that linear relationships between firms and regions are strong enough to capture the variation in stock losses. More importantly, the statistical results supported the alternative hypothesis. Firms and their locations do influence each other, so it's not just correlation, it's a meaningful relationship backed by data and tested by hypothesis. Let's interpret a few of the model's coefficients. Apple had a small positive coefficient of 0.0047, indicating a slight positive influence on the overall loss pattern. Microsoft had a negative coefficient of 0.0288, meaning it slightly reduced the loss outcome. Alibaba's coefficient was 0.2403, showing a strong positive influence, which makes sense considering its scale and volatility. The North American region had a coefficient of 0.06797, showing a moderate effect. These coefficients help quantify which companies and regions are more impactful. Rather than just saying this region matters, we can now say how much it matters and in which direction. Now that we've seen both papers, we can compare the statistical rigor they each apply. In paper 1, the focus was on real-time decision-making through a structured stage hypothesis. The key tools were thresholds and t-tests, which are foundational in quality control. In paper 2, the emphasis was on model selection using evaluation metrics and regression interpretation. Both studies show how sample size, test type, and model selection criteria directly influence decision-making. Even though the domains are different, manufacturing versus finance, the commitment to structured statistical methods remains the same. These results have implications beyond just these two studies. In manufacturing, systems like the one in paper 1 can reduce cost, minimize waste, and standardize quality inspections. In finance, the work in paper 2 help analysts trust their models, not just because they're complex, but because they've been statistically validated. The broader takeaway here is that hypothesis testing adds transparency and accountability to decisions. It tells us when we know enough to act and when we don't, whether it's deciding which parts to accept or which model to use. The logic of hypothesis testing makes the outcome more reliable. Let's put the two papers side by side. In paper 1, the hypothesis tested whether a batch met quality standards. The method was dual stage sampling with seed test. In paper 2, the hypothesis tested whether firms and regions influence each other's stock losses. The method was machine learning with regression model evaluation. The evaluation in paper 1 focused on defect thresholds and confidence intervals. Paper 2 used R square, MSE, Tails U, and others. The impact in manufacturing was more efficient inspections in finance, better model reliability, and despite their differences, both studies rely on the same principle, using data to test assumptions before making decisions. To wrap up, hypothesis testing is more than just a formula or a statistical step. It's the foundation of data driven decisions in every field. Whether you're working on a factory floor or analyzing stock trends on Wall Street, these two papers showcase different paths to the same goal, turning uncertainty into structured evidence, whether through C-test in quality control or comparative metrics in model selection. The power of hypothesis testing lies in its ability to justify actions. As we move into more data driven industries, knowing how to test our assumptions rigorously will continue to be an essential skill. Thank you very much for listening. I hope this presentation gave you a better understanding of how hypothesis testing is applied in both manufacturing and finance, and why it's such a powerful tool for modern analytics.